this afternoon or this morning, wherever you are connecting from. And it is a privilege to have Enten Eller here as our presenter today. The title of this webinar is Best Practices for Online Worship, Considerations and Strategies. And today, as we know, the global coronavirus pandemic has forced almost every worship community to make massive changes within just a short period of time. And the methods and the styles of worship cherished by the church had to be left behind or to be adapted into a new virtual paradigm. And this rapid change spurred by COVID-19 has not allowed us the luxury of time to reflect on how these adaptations might impact our beliefs and our theology. But it is a time not unlike when the Hebrew people were taken into exile in Babylon and had to create new worship styles and new understandings of God and God's people for their faith to survive. These changes, however, are not what allowed the faith to flourish in new ways. And so during this time, this afternoon, next hour, this webinar will address questions about what this unwanted pandemic and the new paradigm are doing for the church in the present. How do we avoid spectator worship and keep worship the work of the people? And what sorts of technology might best fit our theology and our specific congregational needs? So these and a few other questions still to be gleaned over during our hour together. But let me introduce to you Enten Eller, who lives in Palmyra, Pennsylvania. He is a tri-vocational pastor. He currently serves as the pastor of the Ambler Church of the Brethren and also on pastoral staff as the denomination's only completely online church, the Living Stream Church of the Brethren. He has helped launch Living Stream Church of the Brethren into virtual worship space 8 years ago, long before the current pandemic. So he has a bit of an experience factor for him, a bit of an edge to it as well. Enten also has run his own small computer business for over 35 years. And if you know him, and many of you do, he is passionate about using technology to build community in the service of the church, having served as the director of distributed education and electronic communication at Bethany Theological Seminary in a past and previous life. And so it is with great joy to welcome Enten to the stage and to share this time with you. And so I would just like to say that for the next hour, you are invited to set aside or disconnect from anything that may be a distraction in order to more fully take in the content of this webcast, but also to be able to participate as we listen and to reflect and share with each other during this next hour. Enten, brother, thank you.
Thanks, Dan. I have to note it's really ironic to have switched roles with you. I'm usually the one playing the tech in the background to the wonderful programs that you have presented. And so instead, I get to be the one on stage and asking you to help me with the tech in the background. So thanks, Dan. Let me begin by saying where I hope to go with this webinar so that you can join with me and sort of know where we're going. So I want to, after this introduction, I'd like to begin with a word of prayer and then talk a little bit about the current realities we're facing, name some of the questions, but I also want to make sure there's time to open it up for whatever questions, whatever thoughts you have, and whatever input you bring to be able to be shared, because I really want to make this webinar time collaborative with you to the best we can. I'll note that we're on the Zoom webinar platform, and so that's designed for just one speaker or a small panel to be able to present to up to several thousand people. And so it's a different platform than the Zoom meetings that most of us have been used to, but we're going to see what we can do about that in a little bit. So let's start with a word of prayer. Pray with me. God, as we come together to this time to talk about worship, to talk about where you call your people, and to talk about how we can best serve our congregations and share your good news, we pray that you will be with us, help us to be creative and inspired, allow us to engage each other as we go forward with this time, so that as we conclude this hour, we are energized and excited and refreshed and feel like we have more tools to be able to serve your people well. In Jesus' name, amen. So yes, Stan named some of the current realities that we are facing. Basically, we all know that churches all over this country and all over the world had to shut down in very short order of time to be able to close from in-person gatherings. And so most all congregations I know, with few exceptions, have tried to figure out some way of going virtual, going online, connecting in a different way that didn't mean people had to get together physically. There are a few faith communities that delayed doing so, hoping it would only be a short time and they'd be back. But as time stretches on, that's really not been a good option for them. There are some that feel unable to figure that out at all, and so are meeting in other ways or by phone or just not meeting. But as more and more time stretches for faith communities, whether it's churches, whether it's mosques, whether it's temples, whatever it is, we're trying to figure out how to put our old wine of worship into new wineskins of the virtual community, if I can use that sort of metaphor. The issues, though, that I have seen as I have observed this process of quickly jumping online is I think that most of us have done the best we can to put our existing wine into these new wineskins to fit our tried and true worship practices into this new online medium. But since the medium becomes part of the message, I'm concerned that that strategy may not be the best way to go, especially for us Anabaptists in the Church of the Brethren and Mennonites and other related, because our theological understandings of God and community raise really particular questions. And so, here's an example. Many of you have probably seen or can easily imagine an Episcopalian priest as she leads worship in an empty sanctuary, or the Pope, appearing and leading an Easter Mass when there is no one else there in attendance except for a camera capturing it and streaming it out to the faithful. And while that works well for higher church liturgies, for the most part, Episcopalian, Catholic, Lutherans, because in their theology, it's that liturgy that is often what is important. For those of us that are Anabaptists, with our emphasis on gathered community and our conviction that worship is the work of the people, not of the priest, and worship is something where community participation is not optional as a component in our worships, then spectator worship doesn't work for us. Just putting something online of preaching to an empty church leaves something to be desired for us. So we're in a different situation than even some of our sisters and brothers in Christendom about how to address that. And so one of the primary questions that I always bring for myself as I craft online worship services, and as I've done this for probably over a decade now, the questions that are never far from my mind are, how can I foster community, and how might I engage participants? That's not the same kind of theological questions that Episcopalian priest needs to ask herself. But for Anabaptists, we do. And so when you want to talk about leading worship online, that's part of how we craft worship how we need to be thinking about worship. You know, the Living Stream Church of the Brethren has worked really hard at building community online by using things like a chat box, which many of you used when you first came in, and making that available not just to panelists, so it's not just between you and the priests, but making it available for everyone in the worshiping community to be a part of that. But that's where I want to take a moment here, and I'm going to ask for Stan's help. This is a webinar format, and believe me, I've helped facilitate a lot of webinars and still do. But I want you to think about how this format feels to you right now. And some of you have already in the chat box named, you know, you regret it not being able to participate. And we are going to transform this webinar into a more typical Zoom meeting by using the strategy. And Stan, hold on just a second, let me explain it to make sure no one is too freaked out. We are going to make everyone here who's attending this webinar into a panelist, which means that your picture and your mic will be able to be in the meeting. When this happens, your meeting will actually completely close, and then it will reopen as a panelist into the meeting. So don't be afraid if you get logged off momentarily and you'll see a box. But Stan, if you want to start that process now, we're going to try to shift this meeting from a seminar presentation back into a Zoom meeting where we can all be there.
Okay, and we also have one person joining us by phone. And so she, whoever is on the phone is able to talk as well, so.
Good.
All right.
And we could probably rename you. So the 765 number that phoned in, please say hello. Who are you?
John and Doris Cheney.
Okay.
Okay.
So Don and Doris, you've joined by phone?
Yes.
Good. Okay. All right. I see pictures starting to come up. Hello, Blaine. You're the first one. So friends, feel free to then start your cameras. And you can leave your mics muted for now if you want to, but be ready to unmute them. Anitra, glad you're back. Doris, I see you. Cynthia, welcome.
Thank you.
Good. Hi, Eric. Dwayne, glad to have you. I think Stan is having to add us one by one, so it's just taking a little bit of time.
I'm going to go down. Susan.
Good. Ray's here. Susan, glad you're online. Jerry, welcome. Marietta, nice to have you. Good. John, your camera's up. Tom, now we have the meeting you were looking for. Nancy, glad to have you. Don, I am delighted to be leading a webinar, and I am turning it all over to you now since it's all about worship.
I'm thrilled to see you, Enten, and so glad that you're in this teaching role now. I'm eager to learn. Thank you.
Yes, we change roles a lot given pandemic realities, don't we? So, Michael, glad you're online. Are you still there in Dayton? You can just give me a thumbs up unless you want to unmute your mic. Good. And feel free to unmute. Linda, glad you're with us. Trent, you're looking spiffy, Trent.
I think we have everyone transferred over.
Okay. And so, Stan, if latecomers are in, let me know. But good. So Bruce is coming online. Good. Bruce and Richard, you're here. Ike and John and Dennis, if you want to start your cameras, feel free. So now we're back into what probably most of you have already experienced as a Zoom meeting format. And again, with a meeting like this, if you're on a computer, in the upper right-hand corner of your screen, there's a a way to click between speaker view, where when I speak, I get larger. If someone else speaks, they take up full screen, or what we call gallery view, which is where you get to see all the faces at once. And I strongly prefer gallery view myself so that I can see you all and it's not my picture that is large. Choose what you need to. If you're on a mobile device, you can swipe back or forth, left or right, to change your view if you want. Does that work for everyone? Feel free just to give, as we say on Living Stream, the holy thumbs up if that's working for you. Okay. If you have questions during this webinar, feel free to wave if you would like me to call on you. And it usually works best if you put your hand up closer to your camera, because then I'll see you for sure. So please, let's make this interactive. So picking up the pieces theologically, I just made a strong shift with this webinar in the same way that I felt compelled to do shifts with worship online when we moved into this pandemic time. You know, Living Stream, because of who we are and what we do, we use a streaming worship, and so don't have the ability to have everyone's pictures and interaction like this. So we work really hard at interaction in the chat window to build community and make worship the work of the people, where we expect and encourage all worship participants to help contribute to that worship together through their thoughts and comments. But we do that not only by welcoming people and greeting people and by sharing, you know, joys and concerns, but also by, after every message, having time where people are encouraged to contribute, to add their thoughts to the worship, to build that community in a way that's not just fellowship, but is actually building the worship together. That's our strategy. It may not fit for, you know, the answer is going to be different for different communities. But thinking about how you involve people in worship is probably the fundamental start in my mind with how to be thinking about leading online worship. Like I was saying, we had to rush to get online. So it's possible that the technologies that we've chosen in various locations may not contribute easily to that. At the Ambler Church of the Brethren, we're a small enough congregation, as are a lot of our churches of the Brethren, that we made the strategic decision to not stream on like Facebook Live or YouTube Live, but to use a Zoom meeting, because for pastoral care reasons and for theological reasons, we wanted worship to be the work of the people. Acknowledging that it's a lot messier that way. Actually, as a tech professional, I much prefer Living Stream. I have far more control over worship. It can be done well. Things can be, you know, even live. I just know I have the controls to do things. And meeting like this in a Zoom meeting is messy, as you all know, because people don't always mute their mics. There's dogs barking in the background. We had an open mic and had a family member in the background swearing in the middle of worship one week. And we've had Zoom bombers. But it's still much better for us to meet that way. And Stan, I would invite you as the host to also help any of us who have neglected to mute our mics, you know, just to mute them temporarily if there's background noise. In Ambler, we have volunteers helping us with that. So here's another strategy, is use ushers. Use ushers to help you monitor the chat. Use ushers to help you mute people if you need to by making them a co-host that can help out. And then we have what I call a meeting guardian or two, that when we're meeting by Zoom, they can watch out for pranksters. And I prefer that word to Zoom bombers. But if pranksters want to come and do something with the meeting, there are ways to protect yourself by having someone who's has the authority to mute them quickly and gently, lovingly, and non-violently usher them. So a couple of other things that I would want to add before I open it up for all of you is, since the medium is the message, questions that I've been trying to wrestle with as we move into this new medium is, how might we involve all generations who are worshiping with us? That means thinking about how to include people who are not digital natives or may not have access to technology, but also how to try to involve children. So at Ambler, we're still doing a children's story. You know, what ways, as you craft and lead online worship, are you using different senses and different worship styles? There's been a lot of work for people that have said that different worship styles feed them in different ways. And just attention to those sorts of basic questions. Don, my apologies, I'm probably using Worship 101, but just saying that all the same questions still apply in this new medium. It's just that the answers are going to look a little bit different. Another question I have is, as we move to online worship, is what beloved worship practices might we need to lay down, and what new forms or styles might be possible in this new medium, possible in ways that they weren't in the sort of brick and mortar environments where they were. For instance, given that visual and audio arts are so easy to share online, here in a Zoom meeting, I can just share a screen and share, you know, either classic artwork or new artwork or a video or whatever. It's even easier than having a big screen in a sanctuary. My question would be, how might a renewed emphasis on arts and audiovisual enrich our worship, even while we're still trying to faithfully observe copyrights? And so I guess my final question, and Blaine, I'll come back to you in a second, is, are we crafting intentional online worship services, or are we just making do until we can get back to normal? And I know that there are limitations of time and energy. So I'm not saying these questions to put a huge burden on you all, but to say, as we move through this pandemic and things stretch out longer and longer, what are the considerations we might have that can help our worship services become even more meaningful? So Blaine, I saw you had your hand up. Why don't you unmute and join in?
As you're talking about sharing things, and I'm of the opinion the genie's out of the bottle. We can't go back and ignore those who found us by being online. We can't not do this anymore. But my question then becomes, how do we do the visual and not get turned in by the license police and end up having an undue burden of fines and penalties because we're sharing willy-nilly? I mean, to what extent do licenses help us, and are they cost prohibitive? Are they all that related kind of
Right.
ripple effect stuff?
So Blaine, I'll have to say thank you for reading all my notes ahead of time. That must have leaked somehow, because you jumped to my final question, which I'll just name here. In addition to learning what we can from this pandemic experience and taking that forward, Ambler's experience, as I think with many of you, has been that our attendance has increased as we moved online because we have shut-ins or distant members who are joining us. And what we've realized is that our our worship services previously had been more exclusive than we had any idea. And so the question, this is the way I prefer to phrase it, is when we return to worshiping in our building, how can we not shut out the shut-ins? How can we still stay accessible? So the problem is with blended worship, whether that's contemporary and traditional, or whether it's blended worship of brick and mortar and online, blending is always more difficult than either one or the other. Doing completely online worship is a whole lot easier than trying to do worship in a building and meeting those needs, and then trying to stream it out and meeting those needs. So there's always going to be compromises. So Blaine, your question, my immediate response is that's a really sticky one. Back to the copyright issue, though, there are ways, even when we're searching for visual arts, that a Google search can say, show me only the ones that, you know, are either public domain or there's license to share, or through Wikimedia or Wikicommons license. You know, those people who prepare annual conference worships work really hard at getting copyright permissions for everything. And it takes months. And so as we prepare worship, we don't have the luxury of, you know, writing to a copyright holder and being in negotiations and paying for something. It takes too long, typically. And so as is for Living Stream, what we've done is just made a commitment. We're only going to use those resources that we already have permissions to use because they're public domain or people we've been able to get a hold of. But the other question would be the streaming licenses, especially for music. So Living Stream purchases 2 different licenses to try to cover more of what we want to use. So CCLI is one primary resource, and for a congregation of under 100, streaming and podcasting is $199 a year. And then one license, streaming and podcast license through the One License service, which has a number of other different Christian publishers, a little bit different than CCLI. I think there's some overlap, but the 2 together probably cover 90 to 95% of what we would want to use. That's $277 for a congregation of 99 in-building participants or less. That would cover the majority of our congregations. Larger congregations could go more. Mike, I see your hand.
So the One License doesn't cover streaming.
One License does as well. If you, both One License and CCLI have a tier system where you can buy that license and then pay about 50% more to get the streaming option added onto it. So yeah, so we need to choose the streaming options if we do any of this online.
Right.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Other questions? Eric, I see you.
Do the CCLI and One License streaming licenses, I mean, do they cover the majority of music, but also projecting the words on screen?
Yes, projecting words on the screen comes with a basic license. And so when you add the streaming and podcast, what that does is just allow you to also put it online or in posted recording kinds of things.
Okay.
Yeah, Marietta.
I think what you're telling us is that is when you are doing.
Marietta, I can't hear you. Speak up quite a bit. Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Just barely. You're still very faint.
Okay. Here. Hang on.
That's getting better.
Can you hear me better now? So does it cover? That's when you are performing music. It's not us playing like YouTube. That's your church performing music. Is that right?
Right. YouTube is hard because the standard YouTube license does not allow anyone to take anything else. And what we found is if we want to use something off YouTube, you have to basically get the permission of whoever created and posted the video in the first place, whoever actually performed whatever is in the video, and then whoever owns the copyright to the content that's in the video. So to use something from YouTube faithfully, you really need 3 sets of permissions if it's a commercial piece. Most stuff on YouTube, that's relatively impossible, and most stuff on YouTube is already sort of breaking the initial copyright because people use music that they shouldn't be using anyway. And so using stuff off of YouTube is so fraught with difficulty. That's been hard. Which is bad, which is too bad, because there's some really nice resources there. Yeah, Marietta, go ahead.
So what we struggle with at Paxton, where I am, is there's very few musicians. So I'm just curious, do most people have worship teams, or how do you do that if you're going to perform it? Because basically we have a pianist. I'm just curious how you do that.
Well, and Marietta, I'm going to expand, your question a little bit more to say, music is really part of our tradition and ethos as well. It's probably not a theological imperative, but as Anabaptists, we are so used to praying through music and through participating in that. And we have not yet been able to find a way to sing together online because the technology is not quite there to get us synced up closely enough. And so then we turn to some other kind of music, whether it's musicians or whatever. The Living Stream Church of the Brethren has heavily relied on other Church of the Brethren resources like annual conference singing that's already been posted and that sort of thing. So using things that we know that we have permission to access and play again. There was a project that was started. There are a number of Church of the Brethren musicians that have offered all of their pieces for churches to use during this time. People including Seth Hendricks and a number of others. And so Stan, if you remind me, we might be able to find a link to that Google Doc that we could share, because that gives people a resource. And we could maybe send that out to you after the webinar by email, if that would be an interest. But yeah, music is tough. And so we don't have the depth and breadth to choose from. Tom, I'll get to you in a sec. Thanks, see your hand. And so we'll just have to keep working this best we can. And then maybe inviting different people in the congregation to prepare something to share. It gets us back to our roots of, again, drawing on the resources we have and knowing, like Zoom meetings, they're messy, but it's so much more authentic. We're all here together. And so we found a real blessing in that at Ambler by meeting this way, as messy as it is, because people really appreciate being in worship together. So Tom, throwing it to you, what's up? Tom, you need to unmute yet, sorry.
Yes. What's the possibility of, like Living Stream, since you've done a lot of the research for us, setting up a Dropbox of legitimate, whether it's annual conference pieces, NOAC pieces, and so on, that we can pull into a Zoom meeting where the permissions are, in essence, done. Now, I know not everything annual conference does can instantly be pulled over to the whole church, but as well as Matt Riddle's list, there is that. And another guy I know in our district, Dan Rudy of 9th Street Church of the Brethren, is trying to make a list of stuff from Hymnal or Worship Book that are public domain. And in other words, available for us to use freely. Don't know how Dan's gotten with that list. Back to
so Tom, you're
Dropbox.
You're suggesting maybe a denominational-wide repository of license-free or open licensed or licensed to our congregation's resources. That sounds like a fabulous idea. The question would be, who can host that, who can open it up, who can administer it. But the more I think about that, the more I really like that. And I think there's possibilities. Whether we can move through get the bureaucratic wheels to turn on the denominational level and feel like we can get license, get royalty-free sort of things to be able to put in there. But this, your call, I would say this is the time, because most of our congregations, with a few notable exceptions, are settling in for the long haul on online worship, because we are wanting to protect the vulnerable among us and are in no hurry to get back inside our doors because of our care and concern for the health of our members and for the community with whom our members come in contact with, because we don't want to be the vector to spread this to other people. I'm appreciating the questions. I have plenty more material, and I would rather model the way that I like to learn by continuing to respond to your questions instead, with whatever you brought here that you might want to learn or whatever you want to throw into this. I know that the technical kind of answers may vary from place to place, but whatever, questions are fair game at this point. So you've done a great job of getting my attention by waving your hand, so continue. What else do you want to wrestle with?
Enten, can I throw in one place to look for resources is at the denominational website. There's a COVID-19 page with worship resources, and we're adding to that. So as these ideas come up, we invite those, and that can then be deposited there for congregations. Another thing is I would look at the Brethren Faith and Action grant and possibilities to pay for some of these resources you may need. We just funded a congregation that was seeking resources for computer hardware, software, in order to help them with the expense of some of that. So anything that is outreach, whether you have it ongoing but you're wanting to expand it, the BFIA is a good grant for churches to access for that particular reason. We won't guarantee we'll fund all of them, but it doesn't hurt to try or to inquire.
Good. And Don, I saw your hand. I'll jump to you next, but to note that Eric seconded Tom's idea of a repository, especially for music, because music is so hard for us. And then Tom has posted the link to Brethren musicians who are willing to share their pieces. And so feel free to, there in the chat, to be able to grab that link and save that for later. You can also save your chat for reviewing later. If you hit the three little dots to the right of where it says type your message in here, when you're in the chat, you can save the chat. A note that you want to do that again right at the very end, because it saves like a snapshot of right when you click it. So you'll miss the later comments if you click it now and don't go back. So Dawn, I'm delighted to see your hand. Sister, what do you have?
Thanks, Enten. Your earlier question about inviting people of all ages reminded me of how at the Northview Church of the Brethren in Indianapolis, where I worship, our church home, I've been delighted to discover how one of our pastor's children has taken a hand in doing some of the tech work. I think the young people among us may be more comfortable than we are with offering suggestions, playing around with what is available. I say that as a word of encouragement. We may have an opportunity here to involve young people in ways we haven't before. Also, along this same line of young people, in our congregation, we've when we have our announcement time or our welcoming to visitors, the children have been eager to introduce new pets in the home. And they've brought them up to the cameras to show everybody on Zoom. Moments like that are really, I think, godly opportunities for delight and joy and thanksgiving. And similarly, another new development that's taken place very naturally out of the members of the church, of our congregation, has been someone came up with the idea of sharing after worship, instead of a Sunday school time, which we don't quite have now, sharing something that they've been doing that's new for them in COVID-19. One person shared something of a garden she had created, someone else some quilting that she had done, and so forth. There's been an opportunity for sharing that has been very worshipful also, just to mention ideas about involving others' voices in this new medium that we have.
Yeah, Don, I want to bounce off of what you've said to note that, well, two things. In Living Stream, all the pets that have often become part of our fellowship, we call them ecclesiastic critters. So that's just a fun name of acknowledging and inviting them. But this thing about sharing new things, during this time of distancing and isolation, those strategies of how we can connect people and allow people to have times like we're having right now of being together. Even while people are zoomed out in Zoom meetings, having more of a fellowship kind of gathering also not only feeds our people pastoral care-wise, but it feeds our worships, because as we then bring those connections back into worship, our worship life is not separate from our other church life. You know, it all feeds together, and we hope that actually worship bleeds into all the rest of our lives, as we are aware of God's presence. So yeah, all those kind of strategies to me are also part of worship strategies. Doris, you wanted to add something in there.
At Bakersfield, California Church in the Pacific Southwest District, we start our online time at 10 o'clock and have a time of fellowship and gathering, and then start our worship service at 10:45. And we have found that to be very helpful. It gives people a chance to come in as they're able to time-wise. We have a couple of people who need help with their technology, and it allows time for them to get that going, and people in the group help each other, but we also have time to catch up with each other, and so that has been helpful to us. Another question I wanted to ask is, how are other congregations looking at returning to in-person worship? There is a strong move in our congregation right now to get back into in-person worship as soon as possible. And personally, it makes me extremely uncomfortable because roughly 50% of our small congregation fall in the at-risk category.
Yeah, so Doris, responding to your first point, for me, that's just like gathering the narthex and chatting before going into worship. It's a way of adapting to the new paradigm of online, but saying, okay, when we were meeting in the church, we'd all, we'd come early and we would chat and have time to say hello before we go in. Or as Don was saying, we'd have Sunday school afterwards and have, more time. What are the ways that we can think of adapting those needs and desires that were in the old paradigm into this new paradigm? And some of them are pretty easy, like just saying, okay, come to worship, half an hour early and chat beforehand. Some may take a little more creativity, but it's the time to reflect upon our practices and our theology and what it says and what it does. That's so important during this time that we've been forced to make all these changes without having the reflection time. As far as reopening for Ambler, we are really clear that we are not doing that very soon. I'm relieved to be in a congregation that recognizes that. I'll just do a quick hand poll since almost everyone is here as videos. anyone else in a congregation that is really trying to get back into the church quickly? I'm seeing a couple of hands. Good. Cynthia, yours. How about on the other side, how many of you are in congregations that are glad being on the back side of that wave and in no hurry to get back into the building because of our care and concern? So about half of us, a little bit more. And how many just aren't really sure where their congregation falls on that line? Yeah, so about a third are probably in that. Doris, does that help?
Yes, I'm not sure it's going to help in my congregation because I know that there's one person that's really spearheading it, and that person has a lot of clout. And it's not the pastor, by the way. And
Yeah.
which makes it difficult because the pastor is uncomfortable with it. I just think in California, we're not, Bakersfield's only 100 miles from Los Angeles. And we're really still at risk. We have a very large area, and the county has not, they're opening some things gradually, but they did say that churches could reopen, but I don't think, in a lot of cases, I don't think people realize how many things that they're going to have to do that are just little nitty-gritty jobs in order to make things safe for social distancing, for cleaning, for distancing, for taking temperatures, for whatever all of those little jobs are. No hymnals, no Bibles in the pews, no singing, no verbal responses. I don't think they've thought through it. And so that's part of my frustration. Part of my frustration is because I'm one of the at-risk people as well. But when roughly half of your congregation falls in the at-risk category in a small congregation, it makes me really uncomfortable.
Yeah, so Doris, and by the way, I'll get to Dennis and then Bruce and then Cynthia. So Doris, my best advice just off the top of my head, and others may have more, is if you're not comfortable, don't go back. And,
I'm not.
But ask the church leadership as they announce opening up to also make that clear, to open that space, so that others feel free to stay home when they're not safe. That will have to be part of what we do. Dennis, I want to jump then to you. Do you have something to add in this?
Yeah, something we found has been extremely helpful in the last week or so. We put together a reopening survey and sent that out through a Google form online, and then also mailed it out to folks that we know of that don't have internet. And we've had 75 people respond, which has been amazing response. And that's been helpful for us to look at as to how people are feeling about things right now. And so then we've formed a reopening task force to look at some of those so that we have really a sense about the whole congregation. We've had from a 7th grader and a 6th grader up to our 99-year-old who have all filled those out and given us some really good feedback.
Great idea, Dennis. Thanks. Bruce, to you.
In our Columbus, Ohio congregation, there are about half of us that are immune compromised, and the other half is eager to get back to worship. And we are working on kind of a blended plan, adding technology so that we can do every service by Zoom, including those in the sanctuary as well as those of us in our homes.
Yeah, and Bruce, that's a great idea. Blended services are really hard, so I'm glad that you're part of the group helping them think through how to do that.
There are some challenges.
Yeah. Cynthia, I saw your hand earlier too.
Yeah, I'm a district executive for Missouri, Arkansas, and if you saw the news this weekend, you know we're a party place now, and people are taking it very lightly here. We're in an area where we have not had a lot of cases. My county has yet to see a case of COVID-19 in it. So I think it depends on your area where you are. It also depends on the size of your congregation, because I have all small congregations. I did a poll when they opened Missouri up and said everything can start, going back to normal. And some of my church, I had 2 churches that met that first Sunday that they could, that the governor said, okay. I had a couple of more open since then. Most of them are going to start this Sunday with Pentecost. One is doing an outdoor service, which was recommended to do a service outdoors. Our problem in my congregation, and I'm sure in a lot of yours, is that if we have an outdoor worship service, half the people in our congregation will not hear it. They just can't hear that one to hear an outdoor service. But a lot of, since they are small congregations, most of them are in large buildings, and so they are able to do the social distancing and the protocols and everything, and like I said, with no cases and everything. But as the congregation where I have my membership and attend will do this weekend, they're going to recommend social distancing with the partitioning off the pews, and they will have hand sanitizer, mask available for those who wish to wear them, and recommend that people wear masks, and items like that. We will no sharing of mics. We're gonna practice all the protocols and everything too as we begin to worship too. And there are some who will be, as the sister here, that are not ready to come back. And we made sure that they knew that's okay. If you feel like staying home, that's okay. If you don't feel well, stay at home. And we recommend that they take their temperature before they leave their home, and that they drive straight to church. They do not stop to get gas. They do not stop to get a drink. They do not stop to get groceries. Drive straight to church, and then perform before you go home. That way, there's less risk of picking something up on the way. So those are just a few of the things that we're working on. We are fortunate enough that a member of our congregation is the manager of the public radio station here in town. So we have been broadcasting our services on Sunday through the radio station, which has picked up a lot of extra participants we're hearing. And we've also been doing it on Facebook there as well. So we've had those 2 mediums in this time period, and we're going to continue to use those as we begin Sunday. He's going to broadcast live from the sanctuary. He will broadcast it still for those that wish to stay home, and we make sure that they feel comfortable about their decision and that they don't feel pressure to return to worship.
Good. Eric, I'll get back to you. Those are good ideas, Cynthia. Thank you. We've got 5 minutes left, so let me tell you our trajectory. I want to share a couple of other questions that I had prepared that I just want to leave for you to think about. I want to turn it over to Stan for a minute for housekeeping and CEUs, and then we'll use whatever time we have left just for questions and answers and to continue the conversation. And then that, Eric, I'll turn to you first. So I had some technology questions that I wanted to leave with you, including, is our technology serving us well? Do the capabilities of the technology and the format that we have chosen match our theological convictions? Or what are the trade-offs between what we can or cannot do, and what do they tell us about how we might want to structure our worship moving forward? As well as how can we creatively use the platform we have? And who are we including or excluding with the technology choices we have, just to be aware of what we're doing. And of course, the question that Blaine had jumped me to really quick is, when we return to worshiping in our building, how can we not exclude those that we've just been including? But Stan, over to you for a couple of housekeeping things before we end.
Just real quick, thank you everyone for attending today. The link to the CEU request form, if that is something you are looking for as well, I've pasted that in the chat box. You can copy the link and then follow it and fill out the form. And of course, the CEU certificate will come to you by email from Brethren Academy. Thank you very much, Enten, for sharing, and everyone for participating. And Enten, back to you.
Okay, which means back to Eric.
Just kind of some of the comments around returning to in-person worship. I just think another important factor to consider is if your congregation shares its building with anybody. Our congregation, our building is predominantly a preschool, Monday through Friday, morning to evening. Really, the church is only there on Saturdays and Sundays. But with the preschool there, we don't know who's coming in, who's coming out. We don't know what the kids are bringing in. We don't know what the staff is bringing in. But also, we don't want to take the risk of getting any of the staff or parents or students sick. So that's I think that is another thing to consider for any of you that might share your building with someone.
Yeah, Live Oak is in a tough spot there, Eric, that's for sure. Couple more minutes. Wave if you've got something else you want to throw in or ask. Go ahead, Anita. And then Ray after that.
Okay, our church is a very small church, but we have a large outreach into our community that is still going on. We now have a drive-through food pantry. It used to be just servicing, but due to COVID-19, our 700 families has now reached 1,200 families that we service. And we have decided, we had another church meeting in our building. It was a Seventh-day Adventist, so they had it on Saturday, we had it on Sunday, and we've asked that until we're ready to come back, that none of these other groups that come in and use our building meet until we're ready for the building to be used.
That seems wise. Yeah, thanks. And gosh, blessings on such a huge food outreach. Wow. Ray, down to you.
It's really a question.
Oh, you just got remuted, Ray.
It's really a question. We have a number of members who are technology less. So some folks who still are only connected by twisted pair copper, belt phone company lines, that if they dial into Zoom, it's a toll call. We have some members who have cell phones, but it's flip phones, just limited access to, they don't have toll-free calling. And we've struggled.
Oh, Ray, you got remuted again. Sorry.
We haven't found a way how to connect to those people. We make phone calls and everything outside of the worship. But has anybody found a way to connect to the technology list?
Yeah, Marietta does, and plus I do from Ambler. So Marietta, why don't you start, and then I'll throw something in, and then we'll get to Dwayne if you were having a question, I wasn't sure, and then also over to Tom. Marietta.
Our congregation, a couple of the older people are on their landline calling another member on their landline who lays the phone by the computer. So they can basically join by phone on a local phone call because they're calling on their line to another landline and laying it by the computer. And that's working great for them.
That's a really good idea. Another thing that Ambler has done, Ray, is our deacons are helping pay for phone bills for people that have limited minutes or long distance, just as a way of reaching out to our members and keeping them going. Anyone else just want to respond to Ray's thing before I jump to Dwayne, then Tom? And we're about out of time, so this will probably be the last. Dwayne, were you trying to get in? I wasn't sure if you were waving or.
No.
Okay, Tom.
I had a question. Is there any software thing or way to get the text of what you're talking about up on the screen close to where the Zoom camera is, so that you're not sitting there and looking up at the people, looking down at your text, up at the people, down at your text? Any delightful little technical thing to put a second window up on the screen or something like that?
Yeah, very practical question, and I think probably because of time we'll need to end with that one. I'll give you a response. But also to note, this webinar will be repeated next Tuesday evening. So if you've got more questions or want to come back and learn from all the people that will come to that one, you're welcome to come back again. I'm aware that you all are the ones providing most of the content for this. And so I'm learning some good things. So come back if you want. Tom, for me, what I do is I always take my Zoom window and resize it up at the top of my screen next to where my camera is so that my eyes are generally close to looking, making eye contact with everyone, which then leaves the rest of that screen for me to use for content or notes or scripture readings or whatever, if I'm not actually using printed notes, which I sometimes do. So I will hold printed notes here and hold them high enough to usually not, eclipse my face or even be in the camera, but so that I'm only glancing down a little bit. But if you need to read something on the screen, to go ahead and just put it up as close to your camera, even if that means that I'm not seeing quite everyone on Zoom, because if I'm reading printed material, it's usually during my message where I'm not looking for interaction right then, and then I can make it go away. So yes, you're right. Techniques to try to get things as close to your eye contact visual field really help. So did that answer your question? It's
Thanks.
just one strategy.
Yeah.
So, to be respectful of all of our time, thank you all for hanging in there for an extra 3 or 4 minutes. But this will conclude our time unless someone has something so urgent they can't wait. Not seeing any hands though. Thank you. You have blessed me. This has been delightful. Go in peace. Send other colleagues that you think need to know about some of the things we can share to our repeat of this webinar, and maybe I'll see a few of you then as well. Peace, blessings. Stan, any last words before we conclude?
Just thank you for your attendance today and your participation and all the great interaction we've had. And we appreciate your support for these webcasts. We cannot do it without you. And so this is for you, by you, and we are grateful.
Thanks, Dan, for making these possible.
And welcome. Everyone, have a wonderful afternoon or evening wherever you are, and Godspeed. Blessings, stay safe, and be well. Bye-bye.
Thank you, and greetings to Mary Alice.
You bet, Doris. Thanks.
Thank you.
See you all.